Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week I talked to Shana Eisenberg, a song leader and actor who stars in The Moneylender's Daughter at 6 Points Theater starting March 2nd. We talk about how she's approaching this well-known character, playing the title role in a world premiere, and how song leading helps strengthen her Judaism on this week's Who the Folk podcast. But before we hear from Shana, it's still winter out there, so check out the TC Jewfolk merch store with new designs and new colors of hats and sweatshirts that help you stay warm and help support TC Jewfolk and our mission at the same time. Check it out at tcjewfolk.com/store. Shana Eisenberg, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Very excited to get to talk to you. You are the title character, and you look nervous as I point that out, in the upcoming 6 Points Theater show, The Moneylender's Daughter. It is playing March 2nd to 17th. Tell me, what is The Moneylender's Daughter?
Essentially, it's a sequel to The Merchant of Venice by William Shakespeare. It takes place a year after the events of that play, and it goes into Shylock and his daughter Jessica's relationship. Oh. So, yeah.
So you are Jessica.
I am Jessica.
You are the Shylock's daughter.
Yeah, it's intimidating to play a title role.
Is this the first time you've gotten to do that?
I don't think so. I think I may have done it once before.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of when, but yeah.
But it's intimidating. Like I would think that would be a hard thing to kind of get into, perhaps.
It's hard to try and live up to some sort of expectation, right, because the show is about my character and the journey that my character goes on, which means that I have to live up to that entire journey from start to finish.
It's kind of wild when you put it into that sort of perspective.
Yep, she goes on quite a journey. So.
Well, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's an interesting show in that it touches on so many issues that we're sort of currently wrapped up in around anti-Semitism. I mean, and obviously the original Shakespeare play, The Merchant of Venice, is one of his more controversial ones because of that. Mm-hmm. How does it, how does it show that the sequel to a 500-year-old play, does it mesh well?
It does, actually. It gives us a more background about Shylock and how he got to the point that he was at in Merchant of Venice, and what the relationship was that was so broken between him and his daughter that she ran away from him, and then he wants to try and find a way to repair it in somehow, and she's trying to figure out if that's what she wants.
So how much background work did you need to do into the original Merchant of Venice before either auditioning for this role or once you got cast in it?
I made sure to go back and reread Merchant of Venice very, very carefully because there were definitely parts of it that I didn't remember or didn't know. I watched the Al Pacino movie just to make sure all of the words made sense to me. But we have a great dramaturg who's going back and giving us a lot of the history, not just of the Shakespearean play, but of what life was like in Venice for Jews at that time and what life was like for Jews across Europe around that time.
That's really interesting because obviously that at that time, I mean, depending on where you are, it could be not such a great existence.
And in Venice, it wasn't. Yeah. It was there was an inherent anti-Semitism, and so that's one of the things that we're definitely delving into.
What surprised you the most as you sort of got into the rehearsals and the research that's required for this sort of role?
I'm not sure that I was surprised by a ton.
Okay.
It's just been a lot of very focused work and really discovering all of the little nuances that are in each moment, especially between Jessica and her father and Jessica and her husband, because they're two very different relationships and she's trying to balance between the two of them.
Which feels sort of timeless in a lot of ways of
Yes.
balancing the relationship between parent and spouse, and
Absolutely.
the parent, the spouse and the parent with each other can often be a complicated
Yes, and this is
journey.
complicated to an extreme.
Yes. So this is the world premiere of the show.
Yep.
Does it add any sort of pressure? Does it feel different being in a world premiere than a show that has been shown elsewhere?
Yeah, there is a bit of pressure to it. For one thing, we're dealing with a script that hasn't been workshopped a whole lot. And so we're trying to figure out what are the essential pieces of the story we need to keep and what's a little bit extraneous. Mm-hmm. And of course, you're dealing with a playwright who has put his heart and soul into this script and making sure that he's comfortable with the changes that we're making. And also knowing that he's super excited to get to see his play performed for the first time and he's coming here to see it.
How long does it take to, I mean, this might be a question for the playwright, but how long does it take to go from like the development of a script to the point where you're helping put it on stage?
With this particular show, I have no idea how long he's been working on it, but most of the time it takes several years.
Wow.
Yeah. For an artist to conceptualize what they want to put on paper, then actually put it on paper, and then workshop it with actors to try and figure out how to make it tell the story well.
Oh, that is just a different level of writing, you know, to be able to do that.
Yep.
And as somebody who writes for a living, to even conceptualize that is just frightening. Uh-huh. But it's fascinating. That's why I love talking to people, because I get to sort of learn about other processes and how other things work. It's fun. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
But very intense.
Yeah.
One of my favorite people that I've gotten to interview in this job is playing the Shylock, your father, Robert Dorfman, who, in addition to being a tremendous actor, also works for Six Points Theater.
Yes.
What's it like playing not just his daughter, but being on stage with him, somebody who is so talented and has such a background in Jewish theater in the Twin Cities? He's
a delightful person to work with on stage and off. He brings a lot of humor, not just into the rehearsal process, but actually to Shylock. And getting to play off of that as Jessica's figuring him out is really fun. And he's warm and wonderful to be with.
And I suppose this probably would be a question for him, but because you've watched, like you said, you watched the movie with Pacino, you've read the play, you've gone over trying to get into the nuance of it. It can't be easy for him. I mean, really, or for you. You're playing an existing. You're playing a person that's already been out there in literature for 500 years.
Right.
Sort of an existing IP, as people would, in the movie world would say. It's got to be. Does that add to the pressure, the stress, the playing a character that's already kind of out in the ether?
I think it probably does more for Shylock, just because people really know Shylock's character.
Very true.
And Jessica's very much a side character in the original play.
Okay.
We understand that she has a terrible relationship with her father and she runs away from him, but we don't know all of the detail behind that. And that's a lot of what comes out in this play, is getting to know her and why she made the choices she made and how they affect the choices she's making now.
Do you feel like it holds up? I mean, again, it's a little weird to have a sequel written 500 years after the original. Does it? And I know it's not a true sequel, but it really does pick up on the story and the characters that we got to know, some of the characters we got to know in the original Shakespeare production. Do you think it holds?
I do. I think with the history of things and with the story that we know about Shylock, I think it really gives him more humanity. And then it also gives him this relationship with his daughter that we never fully get to understand. And having that relationship with his daughter allows him to have even more humanity. You get to realize that he's not just an evil villain out for vengeance. He is a real human being who's gone through some hard things living as a Jew in Venice.
Your theater background I find to be really interesting. No, not in a Minnesota way. Like, really interesting. This is dramatic stage acting work in this particular show. Your background, not even including your song leading work, which we'll talk about, has been in musicals.
Musicals and a lot of children's theater.
How how hard is that transition to go from, you know, we talked before we started recording, you played Maleficent in the Stage's production of Descendants, the musical. Again, existing IP that has been brilliantly played, you know, recently in, you know, in a Disney movie. This is incredibly different. This is anything but a musical.
Very much, yeah.
What's the transition like for you as an actor?
Because I do so much children's theater, it's about making really big choices that the children can really latch onto. And in this case, the big choices aren't for children. They have to come from a real place inside and a real history. There has to be something that really pushes every line forward. And in children's theater, that isn't as deep. There's definitely a lot more depth of character and trying to figure out exactly what is driving each moment, because every single thing that she says, there's something different behind it, and there's a different reason that she's saying it, and usually multiple reasons for each statement. So
deep is okay for some children's theater roles simply because, like, there are parents of the children in the audience. So, I mean, to me, the best children's shows that we, you know, took our kids to when they were younger, there was something for us, something for them.
Right.
A joke just over the kids' heads enough that the parents really enjoy it.
Yep.
That's the best kind of stuff.
Of course.
But yeah, this is not that.
No, there's very little comedy for Jessica to play, and that's what I'm used to playing. But it's been a fascinating journey so far of just figuring out how my body needs to work differently, how my voice needs to work differently for this type of theater.
For sure. So I mentioned the song leading.
Yeah.
And I said before we started recording, you have one of the more interesting email signature lines that I've ever seen.
Yep.
You've been or currently are a song leader at Bet Shalom, Shir Tikva, the Minnesota JCC Seba Center Early Childhood Center, the Gan at Adath, Temple Israel's Early Childhood Center in Tachabat, Mount Zion, Jewish Beginnings, and JFCS Caring Connections.
Yep.
How do you find the time and, like, move the schedule enough to be able to hit so much of that stuff?
Well, a lot of that stuff is for preschoolers.
Okay.
And so it's in the morning. Preschoolers nap in the afternoon, which means
Lucky.
I know. I have a lot of time to spend working on other things in the afternoons and in the evenings.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where did your song leading start? How did you first get into it?
Olin sang Ruby Union Institute.
Ah.
Yep, I grew up as an Osrui kid. My brother started song leading before I did, and when I was 13, I got my first guitar, and he started to teach me how to play. By 14, I was already teaching music at religious school in Duluth.
Wow.
Yep.
So you grew up in Duluth?
I did, yep.
What was it like growing up in Duluth in what is, you know, certainly a much smaller, possibly tighter knit Jewish community because of its size?
Yeah, it is tighter knit. It was a little. I was definitely minority. I identified as a minority in Duluth because in high school, my high school was made up of 1,800 students, and there were maximum of 10 Jewish students among us. I think it was probably less than that.
Yeah.
So I always identified as being minority and really grasping onto my Jewish identity as a place to feel comfortable. My family, because my parents didn't grow up in Duluth, so they started a chavurah, and I grew up with this very tight-knit group of families where the kids were all about the same age, and we were able to grow up and celebrate the holidays together, and that was one of the places that I felt a nice connection to. I also, Osrui was a good connection, and then I was really involved in Nifty, and that, I don't know if that maybe hindered me from my relationships in high school, but at the same time, it gave me such stronger relationships with my Judaism and with the people that I met through those programs.
I can see the perspective of how it could have hindered it. But I do think that maybe it did, but also I think when you're that age, you just want to find connections with whomever you can find them with.
Right.
I mean, I don't know how old you were and don't need to, but like easier certainly when you were younger than for teenagers now. Speaking as the parent of high school freshman.
I see, and my kids are grown up and out of the house, and my 19-year-old has no problem making friends. Everywhere she goes, she can make friends, and that was something I was never able to do. I was really quiet when I was in high school, and I just had my 2 or 3 close friends, and then I was friends with their friends.
Right.
But I always felt like the person who was kind of on the outside.
I try to tell people there's nothing wrong with that. Have a couple close friends, and they've got a couple close friends, and that's how you sort of build your circle out. Mm-hmm. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, at the time I wasn't sure that was okay, but now I recognize that, yeah, it was fine.
It's just, it's also just a different time growing up now than it was then. I mean, social media, well, there was no social media. We actually had to call people on the phone if we wanted to talk to them.
Yep.
Or go over to their house. But, like, you couldn't just, send them a voice memo or text them or FaceTime them or
That's
whatever.
right.
Like, it's a totally different ballgame now than it was back then. And I know I sound like a grumpy old man when I talk like that.
I totally get it.
But right, you get it. How does your song leading experience help you as an actor, not just on stage in musicals, but also in a show like The Moneylender's Daughter?
Well, my comfort in front of a group of people and communicating with a group of people is definitely much better because I know how to communicate with little ones. And that if you can communicate with a 3-year-old, you can communicate with just about everybody. So just having that understanding and knowing that when I walk in, I can listen to people at this rehearsal and understand every word they're saying, which you can't always with a 3-year-old.
Correct.
And then what I can give back is with this, it's more personal. I can give only so much to the little kids because they are looking for the fun and the face value of music, versus when I'm with a group of adults, I can dig deeper into who I am to help pull out this character that we're creating.
From a character development standpoint, because this is pretty different from a lot of, or all of your past stage work?
A lot of them.
A lot of it. How do you get to that place? Like what's your process for getting there?
My first thing is trying to get comfortable with the words that I'm saying, and then finding out what the movements and actions are with all of the lines. And once I have those 2 pieces with it, it's then finding everything that pushes forward to make those words come out, to make the actions happen, and taking everything that the director gives me, because the director always can see something that I can't see. Right. So if they give me something, I then I make notes about everything, and I go back and sit with my script and look at all of those notes to make sure that I'm committing them to my memory. So when I go back and stand up and do it again, those things are all there too.
And obviously with an adult show like this, the feedback from the audience and the feedback from the other performers is going to be very different than with musical theater or children's theater especially.
There are definitely going to be moments in this play of confusion, moments of not really knowing how to feel about what just happened on stage, and I think that's definitely not something that happens with children's theater. When a scene ends, you know you're supposed to applaud and you're supposed to have a certain feeling walking out of it, but with this show there are definitely moments where the audience is not going to know what to think and not going to know how to feel about what they just witnessed. And then we move into the next thing and they have to decide, okay, how do I feel about this next thing, especially in relationship to what I've just seen. Yeah.
That to me feels like some of the best theater though.
Oh yeah.
Where it makes you a little uncomfortable.
Yes. Oh yes, it's definitely going to have a little bit of that.
Yeah. Where you don't know, like when the theater goes dark, do you clap? Do you sit with it for a while? Like how does that work? Like, what are you supposed? Like, that's good. I think as an audience, like yes. that makes a show interesting.
Yes, that's definitely good, and I think when you do a musical, you feed off of the energy of the audience because you expect applause after each song, and you expect applause at certain places. And this is one of those shows where we can't expect anything because we really and truly don't know how every audience is going to react. They're all going to have a different reaction, and there are definitely going to be moments where there's no response from the audience because they just don't know what to feel.
There are times when you're an actor and you get that instant feedback. Mm-hmm. Like if if a joke is hit or a song goes well and the crowd goes nuts, and you're not going to have that. And the key has got to be to not take it personally.
Oh, definitely not. Even in a musical, if the audience isn't responding as well one night as they did the night before, you can't take it personally. It's just every audience is different. Every person in the audience is experiencing a different day. And with this show, I really and truly, I'm not going to expect any of that applause. I'm going to expect the silences. And in a way, I kind of hope for those silences because, like you said, it's nice going in and having this feeling of, I don't know what to feel. And knowing the audience is feeling that way, for me, that means we're hitting the right mark.
So how did you come to this role? How did this come about? Because I think that for somebody with your background largely in musical and children's theater is a pretty interesting, this feels like a pretty interesting landing spot.
Right. And I've auditioned at 6 Points a number of times in the past, and there just hasn't been the right opportunity for me. And it turns out this one was the right opportunity. John Cutler, the director, saw something in me, heard something in my voice and in the audition that I had that he said, this is the person I want to play the role. And I'm so grateful for that. I feel like it's such a privilege to get to work in this environment and work with this company. But it really was truly about going in and just auditioning.
That's why, I mean, sometimes it is that easy. And again, one of the other fun things in your signature line, and we don't need to go too into this, your next Jewish role comes right after that. You're in a production, a community theater production of Fiddler on the Roof.
I'm actually not in the production.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. It doesn't say that on my signature.
No.
I'm the cultural consultant.
Oh, even better.
Right. This is a production being put on by a community theater run through a Lutheran church. And they came to me and said, we hear that you've done dramaturgical work in the past and you have all of this experience with Jewish culture. Will you come in and help us so that we do things appropriately and we don't offend people?
Wow. Okay, so now this opens up a whole other line that I'm interested in.
Of course.
So, okay, that's very cool. How did they find you to do that work? That's really interesting.
A few years ago, I saw audition postings for The Diary of Anne Frank at a church, and I reached out to them and said, do you have somebody coming in and helping you with this?
Yeah.
And they said, well, no, we didn't even think about it. Exactly.
Oh,
I kind of was like, oh, dear. But I said, I've never dramaturged before, but I feel like this might be a good place for me to start if it's okay for me to come in and do this. And they said, we can't pay you. And I said, that's fine. This is new for me. And so I went in with all of this history, all of this research that I'd done and talked to the cast. And a few years later, another director came to me and said, I know that you've done this. I'd worked with that director before. He said, I'm doing a different production of Anne Frank. Okay. Would you come and work with us on this one? And one of the actors from that production told St. Matthew's about me and working with me in that respect. And so they then turned around and said, hey, we got your name from...
That's very... See, it is who you know sometimes.
It is. It's definitely who you know on a
well,
lot of occasions.
especially in the theater world,
yes.
The acting world.
Yeah.
But it does, I mean, it's really interesting because it opens up, I would think, so many avenues for you to, sort of expand yourself professionally.
It does, except that there are still a lot of companies who it doesn't even cross their mind.
Right.
I mean, I know that there's another community theater in town also doing Fiddler on the Roof at the same time period.
Yeah.
And as far as anyone knows, they don't have somebody coming in to talk to them about this. And it's a community theater I worked with many years ago, and it's not like they have a bunch of Jews as part of their community. They're putting on the show. The reason that most people put on that show is it puts butts in seats.
Right.
Yeah.
Beloved musical.
Exactly. Everybody wants to go see Fiddler, but they don't necessarily stop to think about, should we explain what the tradition is?
Right.
Because that is the core piece of the show.
Right. Right. That's the thing that gets lost.
Very much.
When community groups don't look for a Jewish person to ask.
It's not just community groups. It is also professional companies as well.
I mean, I know that there are, in Hollywood, there are cultural consultants that are brought on to movies all of the time to help make sure things get done right. And, even props like, kippot and talit at a service that's depicted on screen are being worn appropriately, and all of those little things are, used appropriately. But is that something that you'd be interested in getting more into and sort of expanding your...
Absolutely. I mean, it gives me the opportunity to do more research into things that I find fascinating. I have a lot of the research already, so it's just a matter of sharing it and getting to share my culture and part of my identity with people who know nothing about Judaism. It's wonderful, especially this day and age when there are so many questions and so many things going on in the world that people feel like they need to choose a side. And it's just, well, just don't choose a side. Just come to understand things a little bit better and let me help you do that.
Right. There's a right way to do things. Just ask.
Just ask. Yeah.
And it's, and the important thing on the other side is to go into it without judgment.
Absolutely.
And with respect, and acknowledge that, somebody is acknowledging that they need a hand.
Right. One of the conversations I had with JC was, he said, I know what I don't know. And I said, you know what, if everyone in the world could admit they know what they don't know, or they admit that they don't know a lot of things, that's half the problem right there.
Oh, absolutely.
Because then you're willing to ask questions and learn. And I hold no judgment against anybody who asks me questions about Judaism ever, my whole life. If they have a question, I'm happy to answer it, no matter how they phrase it. If they phrase it in a way that's kind of off, I'll let them know. Let's kind of phrase it differently, but here, let me explain why, and let me explain the answer to your question.
Something that I know we've said, in our house and talking about, to our kids, and this is something that came up in a Zoom I was on the other day, of, assuming positive intent.
Always.
Right.
Yes.
Admittedly, I'm not always great about that. But I think, this sort of, dramaturg kind of role that you've sort of come to, it's important.
It definitely is. There are mistakes that I've seen on stage or that I see, especially in the dramaturgical work I've done, that I see the directors are going to in a certain direction, and I'll stop and say, actually, let's shift that.
Yeah.
Because that's not exactly how things would have been. This is how it would have been, and this is how it's going to come off more easily and less offensive to the people who are watching it.
Right. And, beyond less offensive, probably slightly more historically accurate.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's such a big piece of it, especially with plays that, like Diary of Anne Frank, like Fiddler, again, two of what could be hundreds of examples. But those shows are so rooted in a particular moment in Jewish and European and world, in a lot of ways, history, that you do a disservice if you just sort of half-ass it and get it wrong.
Absolutely.
Fascinating career turn. That's really interesting. It's great that you sort of build this repertoire of various theatrical and stage types of work that aren't necessarily in front of the people either. That's behind the scenes work. Right.
It's a matter of making sure people are educated, and there are just a lot of people who aren't, and I'm happy to help with education. That's what I do with my song leading. I'm teaching little kids how to be Jewish. I can teach adults who have no experience with Judaism. I can teach them the basic things that they need to know to understand.
That's so cool. Last couple questions, and we'll let you get back to it because I know it is show week. So first, what is your favorite Jewish food?
My favorite Jewish food. Oh, there are too many to list.
There usually are.
I know. I'm gonna have to say noodle kugel.
Oh, fascinating.
I think. Yeah. I mean, matzo ball soup is way up there too.
Sure.
Yeah.
Is this where I like putting people on the spot because they have to anger a relative potentially? Is there anyone's noodle kugel in particular? Or a particular style? Because obviously noodle kugel is one of those things that there are a lot of different versions out there.
So the recipe that my mom gave me years ago was actually the recipe she got from the facilities person at Temple Israel, who was not Jewish, in Duluth.
Okay.
He was the one who made all the kugels, and they were so good that she got the recipe, and that is the recipe that I use.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Is it like a cheese?
Yeah, it's like cream cheese and noodles
ricotta
and corn crumbs and sugar on top. Yeah.
That's the good stuff.
Yep, exactly.
Adath does a version of that. That is my...
Oh, I'm sure.
my wife's noodle kugel, she loves. It's a lot of dried fruit and in it with noodles and egg and everything. Not that...
Yeah, I don't eat the fruit.
I don't eat the fruit. Find fruit elsewhere in my diet. That's
exactly.
And what is your favorite Jewish holiday?
I love Passover. Partially because there are so many songs, not just traditional songs, but there are so many songs that are still being written today. And for Passover, the list of Passover songs that I have to sing with my kids, I probably have 20 or 30 songs that I could go through. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah. I make my Passover seders very fun.
That's awesome. That's really exciting. Shana Eisenberg, thank you so much for joining me. This was a delight. Again, we will have links to where you can buy tickets and everything in the article and show notes. But the Moneylender's Daughter at 6 Points Theater, March 2nd through 17th at the Highland Park Community Center. Thank you for joining me. This is great. And break a leg.
Great. Thank you so much.
The Who the Folk podcast is a part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network and a product of Jew Folk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.